Hello and welcome back to this video series on creating a grocery list app. In this video, what I would like to take a look at is some of the functionality that involves our database. And so what we did previously is we created an app, we did some routing, we installed Express, and we configured our routes. Let me kill my server, Control C. So we have a few different routes set up. We have one for the home. They're all going to point back to the home page. But then if you look here in the first argument of the get, this is the file path that we will put into the URL bar, or the file path we would need to navigate to once we trigger this route. And so here we have create route, create item, delete item, and that's all we would pretty much need for this application. So right now, let's talk about the database aspect of this application. And what we would need to do to actually create a record, delete a record, and to display a record within our application. All right, before we actually dive into the database, let's take a look at the overall structure of our table and some of the different queries. So this application is going to have one table that's going to hold our data, and the cool thing about this is that it's going to be a database that it's going to be an application where if you shut the application down, if this is hosted, the data will always persist. It's going to, no matter how much data we put into the application, the data will live with the application. And so, but what's going to hold that data in our application, we're going to structure it in such a way where it's going to be held within this table. And then here are some of our SQL commands. You don't need to be an expert in querying for this application, but we'll go over some of these details. And so the three that we'll primarily need for this application is the delete, the select, and the insert. And this is the structure that we'll use for those various commands. And so our table would have three items, or three columns: item ID, item name, and then item count. We're going to use a tool called DB Browser for SQL. This is going to be the graphical interface tool that we'll use to basically create our relational database. There's many different types of databases you can use for an application of this. You can use MySQL server. You can use Postgres database, but for our purposes here, we're going to use a really basic database called SQLite. In the file for SQLite, the database actually travels with the application. And so that's the cool thing. That's the reason why I chose this database, is because you don't have to host it anywhere, but the actual database travels with the application. But the tool we'll need is called DB Browser. You can install that. I already have it installed on my machine. I'm going to bring it up. It's a pretty, the learning curve to DB Browser is pretty, it's not a steep learning curve, but it's a really straightforward and succinct, easy tool to use. So if you want to create a new database, you'll press the button here, the tab that says New Database. And I am going to navigate to where I'm saving all of my information for this application. It's on the desktop, and it's called Grocery App. And I'll just give this and say Grocery DB, and I'll save it. The first thing it's going to ask me to do is to create a table. And so the table I'm going to create is the one I just showed you here, which is going to be grocery item, and it has three different columns. And so I'll put grocery item as my first table, and I only have one table here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pause that and create this, and then just to save some time on the video here. Actually, I'm gonna create it just so that you can actually see how I do this here. So table, I'll just say grocery item. And then you'll see that I have two different tabs here: fields and then constraints. This won't have any constraints. Constraints is like you have foreign key constraints. We won't have any particular constraints, so we just only have fields. And so I'm going to add my 3 columns. The first one is going to be item ID, item name, and then item count. It's going to be of integer data type, so there's only a few types that we can select from. Integer is for numeric data or numbers. It's going to be not null, that it has to have a value. It's going to be a primary key, and this one is going to auto increment. Auto increment is that whenever a new record is created, it'll automatically give it a primary key value. So if it starts at 1, the next one will be 2, the next one will be 3. And the primary key uniquely identifies each row within our column, within our record. The next one is going to be item name, or what do we say here? Yeah, item name and item count. So and that one, I'm going to choose text, and that's going to be not null as well. And the last one is going to be item count, and the data type for that is going to be numeric. In this case, I just make it an integer. And that one could be, you don't have to enter a count. So if you were to enter an item into your grocery list and say, I want milk, you don't want to put down 3 or 4. You could just put milk, and you don't have to put a value for the count of milk. So we'll click OK. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually execute a command here just to put one item into our database. And so we can actually see how this works. So I'm going to copy this statement here. And eventually what we're going to do is our application, we'll route our application to automatically insert new records into our database or into this table. So I'll go back to here. I'll paste this in. And then here to execute this inside of DB browser, there's a couple different controls. If you have multiple statements, you can select the one you want. In this case here, I only have one statement that's going to insert one record into my table. And so I'll press play. We got an error here. No such table. I think it's grocery item, not grocery items. So now we play. All right, we have one item. And if we want to just test this out, there's a statement where we can actually display all the records in our database. And actually, let's do that one more time. Let's add another one here. Let's say sugar. Let's say honey buns. Kids always ask for honey buns. Let's get 2 packs of those. And we'll execute this. All right, that's executed. Now, if we want to view all the items that we just created or inserted into that table, we could do a select command. So we'll say select. The asterisk is basically going to say select all the various columns. And then the keyword here is going to be from. And then we'll just say from what table. In this case, it's going to be grocery item. Some people like to put their statements on different lines. So like auto select or the keywords, whatever you prefer. And then here we'll play. And then you'll see that our database is holding 2 items. So that's the start of our database. And what we're going to do is now we're going to transition back to our code. And we're going to implement some code that would actually do what we did here within DB browser. Now we're at 8:40 in the video here. But let's go back to our grocery app. And here's our database.js file. What I want to do now is I want to enter, let's go ahead and pause here, and then we'll actually flush out this database.js file in our next video, and then we'll begin to route our application to create and retrieve and delete items from our list. So stay tuned.